For the passenger section, I'm going to assume that you were able to get to this point and have the entire body extruded out. The portion that I'm going to show you is the cut section on the top, the cut section on the front, and there is a cut section on the back that you cannot see. Keep in mind that this dimension that you see here, and if you scroll down here, the backside dimension, they are slightly different, so don't be shocked if you have different dimensions for those. But you do need to make sure that they are correctly dimensioned. So we'll go ahead, I'm going to start with this top portion right here, and I'm going to start a sketch on the top. You can leave it like this, or you can flip it. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and flip it, and I'm going to start by making the rectangle in the center portion. And when I make this rectangle, I'm not really going to worry about the dimensions right now. I'm just going to place it, and then I'm going to use the dimension tool to make sure that everything is the appropriate length. So for this first section, if I'm using the top area, and I'm going to say that this is the top portion right here, that measurement is 0.198. So I'm going to dimension that one to 1.98 and hit enter. And then I'm going to do the dimension for this side, and if you Alt tab out and you look at it, the dimension for that one is 1.59. Now I have these in place. My rectangle is the appropriate dimension. I just need to fill at the edges and make sure it's placed the appropriate distance from these edges. Now I could have done the fillet for the edges before I did these dimensions, but that wasn't the case. I'm going to go ahead and fillet these now, and the fillet says that there's 4 of them, so all 4 edges, and that they are at 0.20. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 0.20, and I'm going to fillet each one of the edges. And then close that out. And then I'm going to dimension this to the appropriate distance away. Now, if you look up in the top corner right here, it shows you a dimension for this line away from this edge, which is 0.50. So from here, and it says to the edge, I have a fillet right here. So if you dimension it from this edge, it's going to be incorrect because this is the top of the fillet. However, if you dimension from this edge and set it to 0.50, it will be in the appropriate spot. And it's pretty close. It's not perfectly even on both sides, but it is in the appropriate spot. The next thing, there is a dimension from this edge to this edge that should be set to 0.82. So from here to here is 0.82. And now this portion is in the right spot. And yes, it is a little bit off center. So as long as you dimensioned it correctly, it should look just like this. So we'll finish that sketch. We're now going to use the cut tool. So again, under extrude, cut. And then the distance that it shows us to cut down is 1.07. So I'm going to set this to 1.07. Again, make sure it's set to cut and hit OK. So you will have something like this on the top portion. Next we'll go ahead and do the front portion right here. And again, we've got a rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and just draw this because I'm going to dimension it later. Don't worry about that other line that popped up. And the dimension for these, and I could fillet these and then do the dimensions, but if I do that, sometimes it can, I've had students mess it up in the past. So what we'll do is we'll dimension it first, set it to 2.4, and then we'll set this one 2.93. So these are the correct dimensions now. The next thing that we are going to dimension is the fillets. So those fillets are 0.2, and it says for 4 sides, it says times 4. So we're going to make sure that we fillet each corner. So you should have something that resembles this. Next thing we're going to do is actually dimension them the appropriate distance from the edges. So this one is dimension 0.30 from here. 0.3. and then they give us the dimension for the edge from here, which is 0.39. So my dimensions were pretty close, so it only moved a little bit. Once you have that in place, you can finish the sketch and you can do the extrusion on this one. And the extrusion for this one, let's zoom in a little bit. It's very difficult to see. It looks like a 3, but it's not. Okay, it's the same down here. It's a 5, so it's 0.57. So make sure when you go to do this extrusion, you set that at the appropriate distance. So we're going to, again, cut. And you can see the difference, 0.39 and then 0.57. So it should be back 0.57. Hit OK. And if these were exactly the same size, we could mirror this to the other face, but it's not. So what we'll end up doing is creating a sketch on this side. And we'll use the dimensions that we have down here. So again, relatively simple and straightforward. We'll just make a rectangle and don't want to lock it to any of my other ones, so I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And before I do fillets, I'm going to set the actual distances. So 0.25, so correction, 2.5. So 2.5, and it was already pretty close. Dimension for this one should be 1.0, so again, pretty close. The fillet for this one is going to be set again at 0.20, and it's for all 4 of them. And we want to make sure we actually select the corners. I don't know why it just did what it did, but we're going to click on each of these corners. So you should have something like this. And then again, we're going to dimension it away from the edges. So from here to here, you're at 0.27, and then from this edge to this edge, they give us a dimension of 0.34, so 0.34. So it was already pretty close to being in the correct spot. Once you're done with that, you can extrude, cut this portion, again 0.57, and you should have something that looks like this. So make sure that you're going to have 2 different sizes. The back side is got a little bit more, like 0.10 more on one of the dimensions. Next thing that we will go ahead and make is the portion right here, the extrusion, and they show you the detail for it right here. So I'm going to start a sketch on this side. And I'm just going to make a rectangle, and it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to use this as a guide, and I don't really want to lock it. So I have this rectangle, and I'm going to go back, and I'm looking at the detail. It tells me it's 0.06 in width. So this dimension from here to here should be 0.06. So it's pretty small. And then it gives me a dimension from here to the top. Not to the first edge, but it's giving me a dimension from the top. So from here to here, 0.3. Just like that. Or if you wanted to, you could have just used the guideline right there. So it really doesn't matter, but it is in place. I'm going to finish the sketch, and I'm going to extrude this. And I want to set it to cut. So it is cutting in. Obviously, it's cutting way too far. The cut distance is only 0.06, so we're going to set this to 0.06, and we're going to hit OK. So you now have the cutout on this side. Now you could go to the other side and do the exact same thing. However, we can make this really easy, and we could just use the mirror tool. So we're going to go into the patterns and mirror. We're going to select this feature, and then we're going to select the mirror plane. Now I didn't put a mirror plane on here, so what I'm going to do before I actually select the pattern tool is I'm going to click on the plane tool, and I'm going to mid-plane between 2 planes. So I'm going to click on this edge, and I'm going to click on this edge over here, and I have a plane right in the middle now. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it in a minute, but I want to use this pattern tool now. So I'm going to select this feature, and I'm going to select the mirror plane, and I'm going to hit OK. It's going to make the exact same cut on the other side. So you should have something that looks like this. So go ahead and save that as passenger section if you haven't already done so.